Hi, everybody. My name is Sophie Dillon, and I'm a writer and researcher in the editorial team here at Legal Cheek. Welcome to this event in partnership with BARBRI. No law degree, no problem. Your path to becoming a solicitor. And throughout this event today, our speakers will cover the process of qualification and the recent change over to the Solicitor's Qualifying Exam, the SQE. And we'll be hearing from industry professionals on their take on hiring non-law students. Also on the agenda will be an exploration of the key skills and attributes that graduate recruiters will be looking for so that you can best position yourself to succeed in the legal industry, regardless of your background. So we're lucky enough today to be joined by four exciting speakers from BARBRI and from DWF. We're joined today by Jonathan Worrell, Director of Business Development at BARBRI, Narissa Price, Education Consultant at BARBRI, George McNeely, Early Careers Partner at DWF, and Ed McDonald, a Trainee Solicitor at DWF. So today's event will be running from roughly 4 until 5 before we open the floor for networking until 6. And so with all that in mind, I'll hand over to Jonathan to get this session underway. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, Sophie, and hi, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our session on embarking on a career in law without a law degree. As Sophie said, no law degree, no problem. And I think the purpose of this event is to give you some options, some ideas, and hopefully some inspiration on how you can get ahead in law. My name is John Worrell, as Sophie said. I'm a business development director at BARBRI, the global legal education provider, and I work with around 50 law firms across the UK on their early careers strategies, helping them to attract and develop and qualify talent into law. And I'm very happy to share some of my experiences of what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing from the law firm clients that might help you in your approach. Before I get on to the panelists, a quick bit of background on myself. So I did a business degree in Manchester. I don't know if anyone else did a degree in Manchester. Great place to learn. And I then moved into law firms in a business development role. So not working in law, but I worked alongside alongside the legal teams on things like pitches, proposals, client relationship management, growth strategies. I then moved into the education sector, which I love, in an accountancy field. Then I totted around a couple of startups, which I was keen to see how that worked, and then moved back to BARBRI in the legal space around 2 years ago. And I think the legal space is a great place to be personally. Some of you might be looking at the news, the media, looking at the economy and thinking there's a lot of uncertainty out there. I think the legal space is a solid career path to follow. So I wish you all the best of luck. Right, now let's get on to the panelists. So I'm delighted to be joined by George and Ed from DWF and Narissa from BARBRI. George, can I come to you first just to give us a bit of a flavour of what your focus is and a bit of background to yourself, please?
Thanks, Jonathan, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to jump on this call. I know that many of you will be busy studying and have other things going on as well, so thank you for taking the time. Wherever in the world you are, I see there'll be some of an international audience today, which is great. A little bit of background about me. My name is George McNeely. My title is Early Careers Partner. I'm not a fee earner. You wouldn't want me looking at any of your work from a technical perspective, okay? But my title partner refers to I'm globally responsible for early careers here at DWF. Really briefly, who we were a global integrated legal services business, which is a very big, long word for essentially saying we're a law firm that does lots of other stuff, including regulatory function, legal operation, risk analysis. We have 30 offices in 22 countries, 4,500 people around the world, and primarily a lot of our trainee growth is in the UK and parts of Europe, although we do have some offerings in Canada, Australia, and in North America as well. We're quite a regionally fragmented business, and that sounds like a bad thing, but it actually means that in the UK we have trainees in Belfast, in Glasgow and Edinburgh joint, and then we have Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham and London. We also have offices in Bristol, Southampton and Newcastle as well. So in the UK we have quite a broad footprint. My background before I ran the team here, I was a early careers consultant at Ashurst, a Silver Circle firm in the city, so a very different approach, but actually having worked on both sides of that in two different types of firms, I can give you advice. Prior to that, I worked at a business called Lawyers on Demand, providing consultant lawyers to in-house and help training junior lawyers there as well. And prior to that, in my darker days, I was a recruitment consultant, a legal headhunter, but we won't talk about that too much. Too contentious. Is that helpful, Jonathan?
That's perfect. Thanks, George. We'll be digging into that a bit more in just a moment. Ed, if I can come to you next, tell us a bit about where you are.
Yeah, I guess my career's not been as sort of long as some people so far. But so I graduated from university. Went to university in Scotland at St Andrews and I graduated from there last summer. I did a degree in classics, and now I'm a trainee at DWF. I'm in my first year, and sort of at DWF they front load a lot of the SQE learning. So I'm not actually sort of working at the moment. I'm just sort of studying for SQE1, which I should be sitting in July. But yeah, that's
coming up. SQE1 is coming up, Ed. Yeah. We're going to dig into that as well in a few moments. Thank you for that. Narissa, can I come to you? Tell us a bit about your role.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you. So my name's Narissa and I've been working for BARBRI for the past 2 years as a legal sales consultant. So I assist students in relation to the SQE1, help them get registered and apply for the courses for that, as well as I've completed my law degree as well.
Thanks, Narissa. And we'll be hearing from you about the pathway that these candidates might take in just a moment.
Sure.
So we have got some questions that have come through that I'm going to be posing to the panel. But just before we get on to that, I just want to share my perspective a little bit in terms of what I'm hearing and seeing from our law firm partners. So as I mentioned before, BARBRI works closely with about 50 law firm partners across the UK, from smaller regional firms to larger city firms, to US firms that have offices in London. And I think on the whole, there definitely is opportunity for non-law grads to apply for positions within these firms. So please be encouraged by that. It is very competitive, but it is possible. And just to flag that some of these firms may well ask you to complete a conversion course, i.e. a GDL, a PGDL, in advance of completing your SQE. So I think it's worth exploring that with the firm that you're applying to. From BARBRI's perspective, we don't think this is a necessity. There's a lot of overlap between the GDL and the learning you'll find in the SQE. It's also a year of your time and quite a bit of expense. But I think it's worth thinking about that as you progress your options. So what I would say about candidates that I've seen have been successful that are non-law in terms of background is two things, and that's two things to think about. Firstly, they're really able to articulate how they have transferable skills, either from their degree or from their previous experience, that may be helpful for the law firm that they're applying to. So do have a look at your current CV, your experience, and have a think about how the skills that you've acquired could be very useful to the law firms that you're applying, and make that really clear in your applications. I don't know if any of you follow William Peake from Harneys on LinkedIn. He's quite popular. He does lots of short videos. I recommend a follow. He recently did a video about the parallels between working in a restaurant and the law firm sector. And on the face of it, you might think, well, how is that actually viable? Why would working in a restaurant as a waiter be relevant to the law firm? But actually, when you dig into it and you think about dealing with very demanding customers, competing priorities in a highly pressurized environment, showing resilience, using your communication skills, all of these skills are really valuable to a law firm. So have a good think about what your expertise is and how that could be transferable to the legal sector, and you may just be surprised. And secondly, I think this is easier to say than do, but I think the confidence in being a bit different is important. So you may not be the same as everybody else that's applying for these roles, but really focus on why you are different and how that is an advantage to law firms. Law firms on the whole are looking for good diversity of candidates, diversity of thought, diversity of background. So if you can demonstrate how that is, your difference is a selling point, I think that is a very positive way forwards. So that's a few thoughts from me. And I'm now going to come over to you, George, if that's okay. If you have any reflections on that kind of piece, I'd be interested to hear your take, but also just tell us about your approach to non-law grads where you are.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think it's a good point. I think the point to highlight above all of this is that actually, when we're trying to hire for future lawyers, we're looking for individuals with potential. We're not looking for the finished piece, right? And so actually, when we're looking for potential, we're looking for people with all the features that we could turn into a future excellent lawyer in the long term, okay? And those features don't necessarily, or actually, they don't include an LLB. That's not the point of it, right? Actually, if we wanted the finished article, we would go to the market and find someone who's already qualified and actually hire them in that role. So actually, when we're looking for future talent, we're looking for people with potential. What does that potential mean? Well, I can speak for DGRF, but actually I'll speak generally for law firms. We're looking for about transferable skills that can apply to the role of a solicitor. We look about a range of behaviours that can apply to the role of a solicitor, and we can look at essentially a group of potentially some work experience or academic experience or extracurricular experience which contribute towards being a solicitor. Now, again, all those three things are not LLB exclusive. They're not exclusive to people who've studied law at any particular level. And that's not to say that doing a law degree is a bad thing, but you guys are in a completely different world of this. So I think if you start thinking about, you'd be surprised to hear a lot of law firms, we're looking at things like values and behaviours. Do you have motivation, resilience, determination? Are you grounded? Have you had some kind of practical experience? An anecdote I always say at Ashurst, we gave a training contract to an individual whose only work experience had been in a fast food restaurant for no other reason than they could demonstrate the skills they learnt in that environment, practically speaking. It didn't matter about their academic background in terms of what subject they chose. So I think, generally speaking, don't get bogged down in the idea that, we're looking for the perfect lawyer and you have to have a law degree for that. What we're actually looking for, the person that we can mould into the perfect lawyer. And there's a big skill set in there, and I can go into more detail about that, generally speaking. But I also think that actually diversity and inclusion is a really important topic for our entire industry. That's just not from an ethnic minority background, from a gender background, from a sexuality background. That's diversity of thought. I'm neurodivergent, right? But when we talk about diversity of thought, people from a wide range of backgrounds as well. And that actually means that, for example, law firms are getting much more involved in tech, much more involved in data. So actually students from a STEM background are of particular interest when it comes to that. We might talk about someone like Ed, who's done a more classical degree, something working with writing, drafting skills, writing skills, communicating, arguing to a certain extent is, again, a massive skill to be a lawyer. So, I don't think that firms look through an LLB and non-LLB lens, or we definitely don't. And I think a lot of firms don't do that. What we look to do is create an environment whereby, you can come and perform, be that an assessment centre or a vacation scheme, and actually you can perform on there regardless of your degree education. The one thing I will say is that our industry has an academic bar. I will be really honest about that. The academic bar does not mean that you have to do a law degree, but it means that you have to perform academically in whatever subject you take on. So I think it's really important that actually you can demonstrate that you've got the aptitude for your academics in terms of learning, studying, applying yourself, no matter what you're doing, whether that's classics, geography, English lit, mathematics, any of the sciences as well. So I think the two takeaways from that is that the industry does not see it as LLB versus non-LLB. We see it as we want to see a range of skills, behaviours, qualities that are going to make you a great trainee. But you still do need to demonstrate your ability in an academic sense, regardless of what that is. At the moment, most law firms have around 50-50 LLB to non-LLB. It just kind of falls that way. That's quite natural. One thing we have at DGRF is something like nearly 25% of all our trainees have some previous experience in whether that's life as a career changer or having worked in policy, having worked locally or worked as a paralegal. So if you're a non-law grad and you're not sure which step to take next, any kind of employment could go on to aid you. I'll stop talking a second, Jonathan, but the one thing I always say
Go ahead, carry on. It's really insightful stuff, George.
The one thing I say about trainees, and I'd be interested to see, actually I'll say it now and I'll reveal it later, but I'd be interested to hear if anyone in the chat knows the average age of a trainee in the UK, because I think it would surprise you a little bit. But the narrative is that going straight out, and Ed is probably the exception to this rule, going straight out of university to being an undergraduate to go on and getting a training contract is not the standard route. Okay, you might see it on LinkedIn and social media, but it's not necessarily the standard route. So don't get bogged down in that. Actually, sometimes some work experience is helpful, and I find non-law grads really find that helpful to decide whether the industry is right for them. Is that helpful, John?
Yeah, really helpful. I mean, if I can just dig into that a little bit more. So you're open-minded, and you feel that the sector in general is open-minded. Are you, if you see an application from a non-law grad, are you expecting them to be demonstrating anything above or beyond or anything different, or do you just look at it as one holistic group?
Yeah, I think there are going to be some slight differences. There are some areas where you're going to have to work a lot harder, and I'm just seeing the guesses coming in. People are around about the right number, by the way. There are some things that it's going to be more difficult for you as a non-law grad to explain when it comes to an application. I'm not going to deny that. There are some challenges you're going to have, okay? And I got some advice for how you can fix that. So those challenges may be making references to black letter law, any big regulatory changes, keeping up to date with the current legal market, knowing about practice areas, knowing about individual matters that are going on, okay? So the very legal specific things are more challenging for non-law grads. So I would expect that you guys are probably going to have to work a little bit harder on that. However, demonstrating transferable skills is actually going to be a little bit easier for you, because most people are applying with an LLB, right? They've done all the same modules, they've had all the same experiences, they've had all the same exposure. So where you might struggle a little bit in showing your in-depth legal knowledge of the industry, you're going to benefit a lot more saying, hey, I do chemistry, and in chemistry we have to have these skills and we have to apply that. That is something you have over anyone who does a law degree, because you're going to be much rarer in the market because there's so many non-law degrees, right? So you've really got to hammer down on that. The advice I'd give if you are on the call, the top tips I would give you if you are thinking about applying and you're worried a little bit about your in-depth legal knowledge, people like BARBRI are really, really helpful. Look at articles, follow what they're doing in the news. People like Legal Cheek, particularly helpful as well. Absorb yourself in that. And then 2 or 3, maybe only 2 or 3 kind of little commercial or podcast updates. So Little Law is a really good, I'm not sponsored by any of these groups, by the way. Little Law is a really good commercial awareness group that will provide you with updates. The FT do a 2 or 3 minute briefing every single morning, which I think is particularly helpful. And then actually it's really helpful to get an understanding of more global commercial matters that might be going on. So for example, things like Rest is Politics. I'm going to sound like a centrist dad now, but Rest is Politics is great in terms of the geopolitical circumstances. So, to absorb yourself in the industry is a little bit harder, but do take your time on that. But actually make use of the fact that you've got something very different on your CV, which is a non-law degree that 50% of candidates will not have.
And you've given some great tips there. There was a question, I think, in the original submission around being commercially aware, and I think following all of those different entities and their posts and keeping up with the news is one great way of doing that. And where do you sit with the GDL situation, George? And do you think that is shifting? Do you require candidates being required to do the GDL before they do SQE?
So we don't necessarily require a GDL for a number of reasons, although we are finding our way in the industry, and I think everyone is doing that. John, I think you guys have got some very suitable alternatives, or you've got some suitable recommendations for non-GDL. I think I don't want to get down the route of talking about the SQE too much, but actually the benefit of the system now is it's much more accessible and easy for people to access the SQE.
Which we welcome,
whether it's right or wrong, it's supposed to be more accessible, and actually the use of QWE rather than a training contract and all those kind of things are beneficial. My general view is that implementing a necessity to have a GDL is a little bit challenging, I think. I do think the GDL, as it was, the previous GDL was actually really quite a good course for people converting. However, I think the style of the SQE and the direction that the industry is moving might change, or will definitely change the landscape on that. In terms of early careers and practice groups, there's kind of the jury is out a little bit. I think lots of different firms are thinking about lots of different areas. But for me, the GDL is kind of a secondary thing, really. Actually, are you a great, talented individual? Can we put you through the SQE? And can you do 24 months qualifying work experience? I think they're the 3 big topics, and a GDL might just be a little bit of a kind of an ancillary thing where people decide to do it, people decided not to do it. What do you think, Jonathan? Is that a thing for you? What are you seeing in the market?
I think it is shifting slightly. I think law firms traditionally are quite risk averse. And I think as soon as you start taking things away, everyone panics a bit. But we are seeing that this is entirely, with the SQE, an entirely new approach. And I think, once we have a few students that have been through it, like Ed is going to get through it, others have been through it and been successful, then people will be confident in it. But I think it's still quite new. So the shift is happening. I don't know if you agree.
Look, I think law firms are risk averse. That's generally true. However, I think law firms are starting to get more confident, or from my perspective, we're getting more confident with our SQE results going up and up and up, and we're getting better at that. I don't want to reveal exactly what our SQE results were in January, but I can tell you it's over 20% higher than it was the previous year, and that was over 20% higher than the average. So you can do the maths and work out they're in a pretty good place. So I mean, what I would say is that law firms are getting more confident. And I think in my time in the industry, law firms got a lot more confident with non-law grads, and actually a lot more confident with various different routes into the profession, because it's not all the same as it used to be. We have, I think we're now up to nearly 100 solicitor apprentices at any one point at DWF. So
That's huge.
Yeah, I mean, we're taking people that it's not about law degree or non-law degree. It's people with no degree, for example. So firms are getting much better at accessing that, I think, from my perspective.
Good to hear. Just coming on to follow up from your previous conversation about, I think, the standing out in applications. Can you give us a bit of a sense of kind of your application process and what that looks like? And again, touch on the kind of particular skills that you're seeking in general?
Yeah, and I think I can give a general overview for the way that firms will go, and then maybe a little bit of something that we do
Perfect.
differently. So firms tend to have a multi-stage process, as you know. It tends to be quite intense, as Ed will probably allude to slightly later. Hopefully, we weren't too intense, just didn't scare him off. But you will tend to find a few different focus. You will tend to find some form of application form, and more often they're not CV and covering letter. They're much more around an inbuilt application form with a lot of data in and maybe some questions. What I would say is lots of firms use contextual recruitment now. What that does, it takes your personal information and it allows to put your application in context from a range of factored mainly around disadvantage. Okay, so you put your A levels in. If you went to a bottom 20% school, it will adjust your A levels on an index to the level that you should be achieving if you went to a standardized school. It also allows us to understand lots of different factors of disadvantage. So being a carer, asylum seeker, free school meals, your postcode when you grew up. So I would recommend fill in those details. If you're asked for that stuff, it's completely confidential. Everything's locked down. But actually, it's really important because that helps give you the chance to put your application in context. So most firms have an application form. There's then usually something in between that and an assessment centre. So we do video interviews. Some firms do psychometric testing. I'll be really bold and say I don't believe psychometric testing at the moment is in the right state to do that completely. I think a lot of psychometric testing can be particularly disadvantaged to candidates. Neurodivergent candidates, disproportionately our Black heritage candidates also struggle on psychometric testing. The psychological literature gives absolutely no reason why, but actually at DWF, I'm not committing us to doing psychometric testing unless I know it's going to be fair and equitable. So we don't do that. We do pre-recorded video interviews. So again, that's another filtering method. We'll then move on to an assessment centre. We run a 3-part assessment centre all on one day. So we look at your written skills, your group exercise skills, and your personal skills. And then the final stage for us mainly is vacation schemes. For those of you who may be new to a vacation scheme, a few weeks, usually in the summer period, where you're paid to do some kind of work experience as an internship, essentially. It's try before you buy for both you and I, right? You need to see that we're the right firm for you, and you can come and test us out for a couple of weeks, and we need to see that you're the right fit for us. So that tends to be the process. You don't always go all the way through round one. Actually, we have a lot of trainees who may get to video interview first year, assessment centre the second year, and then through on the final go. But actually, your firm, particularly after assessment centre, a firm should be offering you some reasonable feedback for you to amend on that as well. So lots of firms will be different, and look, firms might have very different approaches to gamified testing instead of psychometric testing, which I actually think is really good. But that's the kind of the general overview. I think it can feel quite daunting at the start, particularly if you're not thinking of applying for other professional services. So if you don't want to be an accountant or civil service fast stream, this will feel like a very big process compared to a CV and 2 interviews, right? But actually, I think resilience is a key factor for being a solicitor and being a qualified lawyer. So being resilient and going through the processes, I think, is particularly important. And keep your chin up, essentially. It is a numbers game to a certain extent.
Great. I just want to address a couple of I'm going to move on to Ed in just a second, but George, while you've got the microphone, career changes. There's a couple of there's a few career changers on the call who are maybe 5-10 years into a career, want to switch. What's your thoughts on that? Yeah,
awesome and amazing. We have quite a few. We have ex-police officers, ex-civil servants. We have someone who used to run a care home, and also not just career changer. We also have We have about 7 or 8 working parents who are trainees as well, who have had a career, have had a second career raising children, and are on to their 3rd career with becoming a solicitor, which is amazing. I think that one of the most important things about being a career changer is our industry is crying out for people who've had some life experience to apply that. So back to the earlier question, the average age of a trainee in the UK is between 27 and 28. So coming out as a straight undergraduate and going straight in, actually quite uncommon, and quite common that people do other things. So as a career changer, because of the diversity of thought in the industry now, you should be really doubling down on your previous career in applications, no matter what that is. That could be being a fireman, that could be working in an office, it could be traveling, working abroad, it could be anything. But actually, again, similar to the non-law, you've got a really big advantage. I would say that the highest scoring person in our assessment centre last year, and he won't mind me saying, is a deputy head teacher of a school with 3 kids who received a direct offer from us because of his outstanding performance. And Ed, he'll be joining your cohort in September in a different office. Lovely. So, it's definitely big thing for us, and we would recommend people do it. And actually, you tend to make really, really good trainees because you don't sweat the small stuff and you just get on with it, personally.
Great advice there. Thank you, George. We may come back to you. We may well. Ed, can I come to you now? So you've been through much of what George has been detailing there. But if I can just come back to the point that you did a degree in classics.
Yeah.
What made you decide to get into law after that?
So I think I always thought of it as sort of an option, and I sort of, even when in my first year, even before I started going to university, I thought it was an option at the end, and I sort of hadn't been put off by the whole not doing a law degree thing. But then sort of getting towards my penultimate year at university, I was sort of thinking about, all right, I need to start thinking about what I want to do next here. And I wanted a job that sort of had similar skills to the sort of things I enjoyed doing during my degree. So classics, you've sort of got, as George was saying earlier, sort of drafting skills and sort of constructing arguments in the more sort of essay-based questions where you engage with large themes. And then obviously it's language as well, so it's kind of quite a lot of problem solving, analytical sort of attention to detail. So I sort of, they're all sort of things I enjoy doing, and they're obviously very applicable in a career in law. I guess there are also things you can sort of say on an application form as well, as George was saying, the sort of transferable skills that you need to really emphasize if you've not got a law degree. But yeah, I think that's the main reason.
And tell us about, so many people will want to follow in your footsteps, perhaps, Ed. Tell us about your application process. What did you really focus on or major on, or how did you approach that?
So I'm quite aware that a lot of, well, I found it anyway, a lot of firms, if you're in your penultimate year doing a law degree, you can sort of apply for vacation schemes in the summer and training contracts. But if you've not done a law degree, most firms in my experience sort of don't offer a vacation scheme or anything. So I sort of did some work experience in my penultimate year at sort of more regional firms, just to sort of, I guess, wanted to see if it's actually what I wanted to do. And I didn't absolutely hate it. And obviously I didn't, because I'm here now. But also I think it just, if you're sort of engaging, and it shows firms that you this is what you want to do, and you are sincere about it, and you're not just sort of panicking and thought, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, I'll be a lawyer. If you sort of got experience in that sort of that area before. I also I joined sort of a legal publication at university, and sort of I wrote sort of a couple of articles a term in that, and that on top of sort of looking good on that application form, because you're sort of engaging with the law. It also kind of helps you keep on top of commercial awareness, because it was all sort of about current affairs, current issues with the law. And then sort of in my my final year, I'd figured out more, right, okay, these are the firms. I sort of researched the firms over the summer. These are the firms I want to apply to. And then sort of, I imagine a lot of people listening have probably sort of gone through the same thing. Sort of, okay, why do I want to go to this firm? Why do I want to go to that firm? And then, yeah, sort of.
Did you make a lot of applications?
I did. You see, so I was sort of told, I went to sort of things like this, and I was sort of told, don't just do a lot of applications, because they won't be tailored, and you won't come across as unique at all. If you can copy and paste your answers, I mean, okay, some of it is sort of transferable skills, but if it's not tailored to the firm, you're not going to get it. So I think I probably did 7 or 8 in the end, but not too many. And DWF was the only sort of one I was successful with a vacation scheme for.
One's all you need. Yeah. Good work. Yeah. And how are you finding the experience so far? So just to clarify to everyone on the call, so you are front loading your study in the sense that you're studying SQE 1 before you join the firm. That's right, isn't it? So you're currently coming up to your July SQE 1 exam. So you're basically in the early stages of your studying towards the qualification. And how are you finding that?
It's a bit of a weird one, really, because the rest of my cohort have sort of, I think they've either done the GDL or sort of an LLB. So they're all sort of, they did their SQE 1 in January actually, but because I've sort of got no sort of academic grounding in the law, I'm sort of, at the moment I do feel a little bit sort of detached, because I'm doing it with BARBRI. I think they were with BPP, but I'm anticipating once we're sort of all in the office next year, that's going to be sort of much more.
So you're kind of on your own BARBRI path at the moment. Okay. And are you feeling any different in terms of the study? How is that feeling? Is that feeling like it's going well? Any gaps in your knowledge, or how is that being a non-law grad? Are you aware of that at all?
I think sort of to begin with, I think there's stuff like there's sort of quite a lot of vocabulary that just I hadn't really been exposed to. So I'd done the work experience. I wasn't completely blind, but there was a lot of stuff that I sort of, it takes you a while to sort of get used to sort of terms and how things are worded. But sort of once you get over sort of the first couple of weeks and you sort of get into it properly, I think the way that the course is structured at BARBRI, the lectures and then the sort of consolidation questions like a week or two later, so you can sort of keep reinforcing the knowledge is really good.
Good stuff. And we put you through the foundations course, which Marissa's going to talk about. So you did do a bit of extra study before SQE, didn't you, to get yourself up to speed? Was that helpful?
That was definitely helpful. Actually, a lot of the sort of the stuff they covered was sort of the foundational points of a lot of the topics anyway. So when you weren't going in completely blind, which I think if you've not had any sort of legal exposure before, that's definitely really helpful.
Good stuff. So what else was I going to ask you? Let's see if any questions are coming in. I mean, what advice would you give to other people on the call in your position? Clearly, you've been successful, which is fantastic. Congrats. That's amazing. What else can other people think about to position themselves well for applications?
There's a couple of things. Sort of, I imagine, I mean, I was told this as well, and I followed it. So it's really sort of, if you haven't done a law degree, really emphasize that. Don't sort of try and hide it. Because it is your sort of unique selling point. You have a different angle to look at the law. So if you do tailor your applications towards sort of come from that angle, it's definitely a good thing. And then also sort of, I guess it's quite cliche, but don't be disheartened and sort of don't panic, because I was sort of, DWF was sort of one of the last applications I did. And at that point I was getting sort of nowhere, and I was really sort of starting to panic, like, oh gosh, what do I do here? But I think just keep going and sort of it will happen. Keep persevering.
Good advice, Ed. Thanks very much. Narissa, I've just been informed that the fire alarm's been going off where you are. Is that stopped now?
It stopped now.
Okay, phew. And you haven't had to evacuate. Everyone's okay. There's no fire.
We were fine.
Okay, good. Good to hear. Phew. So if we can come to you. So we've talked a lot. We've had quite a few questions about GDLs for non-law grads. And I've mentioned the fact that we don't think at BARBRI that's entirely necessary. So can you run us through, if a non-law grad wants to quickly get through the SQE, what the options are from BARBRI's perspective and how that's structured and what that costs?
Of course. So for those who are coming from a long law background or those that haven't done law for a very long time, BARBRI does offer a Foundations in Law preparation course, which is 6 weeks. You just have to devote 10 hours per week to your study and devotion. And what happens is you would access a personalized study plan where you would have the core modules of the legal English system. Now, for the Foundations prep course, you would have interactive exercises. There'll be workshops, pre-recorded lecturers, so it's very interactive itself. Now, as long as you devote those hours to your studies prior to taking the SQE, it would definitely give you more confidence before you start your actual preparation for the SQE itself. We offer it standard alone. So if you are doing a preparation course by itself, you can, register for this at any point. It would be about £499, so it's very competitive in terms of pricing. Or we do offer it in bundles. So we do the SQE preparation as well as the foundations, and we offer this on our part-time courses. So if it's our flexible course of 40 weeks, it's about £3,699. Or for our focus course, which is 20 weeks, it's about £3,399 in terms of cost.
Thank you, Narissa. I'm going to go back to some of the questions.
Sure.
George, this one's for you, I think, really, but I can answer it as well. If a firm is requiring a PGDL, do they typically cover the cost as part of an onboarding program, do you think?
I think if a firm was going to specifically say we need to do GDL, I would expect them to cover the cost from my perspective as well. I know that other firms, particularly some of the city firms, are doing that. I think that's why firms are probably reviewing their position on the PGDL. How relevant is it in terms of the investment? To call out Ed, I think Ed's probably a really good example of how we can see success without that PGDL, and we support people in terms of that route, sponsoring his costs. I think it's important for us, but actually, do we need that PGL to do that? But I would expect if a firm are going to make you an offer, most firms, major firms, or firms that are you should really be trying to apply to, should be supporting you financially through that model.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons we use the apprenticeship model in some cases, so we can actually pay salaries alongside that, which is a real benefit of our model, rather than just giving you a maintenance grant and kicking you out the door. That means you get access to our support through our fantastic DDRF early careers team, who I'm sure one or two of them may be lurking on this call watching the presentation. So yeah, I would expect a firm to pay for that. Again, one of the things is that firms generally will provide you a package in terms of your training. So they'll obviously give you the training, they'll give you the study, but they'll also chuck some cash in towards kind of a maintenance grant or a salary or whatever that looks like as well. So that's why it feels very much like a golden ticket to get a training contract. However, I would say as a London Law grad, research the SQE and qualifying work experience known as QWE. So you actually you work as a paralegal somewhere. That can contribute towards your eventual qualification as well. So it's not just the traditional training contract route. And actually, lots of non-law grads, if you find yourself in a paralegal role, actually, do you know what? There could be a year or two and some exams out of your way, and you don't necessarily need to complete the traditional training contract.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think typically that is the position of the larger major law firms. I think there may be a slightly different position in the smaller firms in terms of asking for entry requirements before candidates apply for roles. But I think it's just worth clarifying that 100%.
Yeah, and I think that there's been a couple of questions for as well. I think that, if you're thinking about doing it if you're undertaking a PGDL but you've not done it, or you're planning to do it this year, your application form will always say, are you predicted this grade? Have you completed this course? And when did you start this course? I don't think it makes a huge difference. As most of a firm, again, will go back to the behaviours, the skills, the values that you demonstrate, not necessarily the qualification. So if you're good enough, we'll pay for you to do your course. If you're not good enough, it doesn't matter. You've got all the courses in the world. It doesn't make a difference. Okay, so it's about your application. And some other questions. How long does the PGDL stay valid for? I mean, I can double check this, but realistically, I don't think it runs out. It's like a degree, right? And it's not time bound in that sense. And you want to wait a few months, save up some money before doing SQE 1 and 2. Yes, absolutely. And I would say that affordability of BARBRI. And one thing we talked about earlier, one of the reasons we use BARBRI for a lot of our sponsored routes, so paralegals coming through us who are going forward to study. We love the BARBRI platform because of the slightly more transactional nature of it. If you complete the work on time to spec in the space that you have, you will be successful. We tend to see that outlook as opposed to maybe a slightly more traditional university style method with BPP and ULaw, which we use BPP as well, full disclosure. But actually, do you know what, for you guys, if you're thinking about self-funding or using your qualifying work experience and finding a firm to sponsor your qualification, I think we find BARBRI is a really accessible platform for that. And I'm not just saying that because Jonathan's here.
Yeah, thanks, George.
We're genuine because we previously only used one provider. We moved to BARBRI now, and we probably have 40 learners with you, Jonathan, at any one time.
Absolutely. Flexibility, accessibility, that's what BARBRI is about. Coming back to the assessment centres, so Archna's asking, how would you advise is the best way to prepare for an assessment centre?
I think that's a really good question. So Ed made a really good point about how many applications you do as well. If I open your application and said, I really want to work at Clyde & Co, but can't, this year. So I think
that happens, right? It happens.
Yeah, the prep goes all the way back, I think. So, an assessment centre, you should really be using the prep you did for your application towards the assessment centre. I think that's really, really important. So one of the really good examples I would give is if you just carve out half an hour on a kind of a Friday afternoon or whenever you do, or in an evening, and actually in that application phase when you're putting applications in, open OneNote, open a document, store links, save things you know about the firm. So actually, when it comes to the assessment centre, you kind of got your notes. It's like an exam. You've got your notes prepared. I think you will see a lot of interview questions being strength-based, and Ed may be able to attest to that. A lot of our interviews are strength-based because actually that is irrelevant of your background or whatever you've done before. So kind of, tell me about a time when, imagine you're in a situation when, blah, 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 blah. So there's lots of those kind of strength-based questions about your personal experience. And it's not about what you did, it's how you applied what you learned a lot of the time. So that's strength-based. And I think in terms of knowing the firm, a really big thing for us is about values. So if you come into DDRF, we have 5 values. I'm not going to run them off in case I forget one. Lots of firms have values. Good to know those kind of values and what underpins them. And I guess the final thing I'd say, so use your revision that you probably done before. Think about your strength-based questions. And then when it comes to the firm, know about the values, but also Chamber student, not to plug them, but they are really good in terms of knowing things like practice groups. So you may or may not know that 50% of all practice areas at DWF are based in insurance, right? So if you walk in and actually deliver an interview that doesn't mention insurance at all, Do you think you have the knowledge of us as a firm? Probably not. You go on Chambers Student and you can get a full readout of what our practice groups look like and who is in there and what they want to be doing. That is a really big thing. So, look at the practice groups, look at where the firm's direction is going. If you want some absolute extra marks, I think I put it in a comment, the way to get absolute extra marks, if you can name drop a client, a partner name and a deal size, you will absolutely walk an interview. So you can say, I was really interested in by the M&A purchase by Darren Ormsby with McDonald's that was worth 200 million that I saw last week. Okay. People on the other side of the table will be like, that's incredibly smooth. Well done. Now, you don't have to do that, but if you can, just check the news on a firm website before. So that is hopefully a kind of a little bit of an abridged version. And in terms of support, a lot of firms will be very similar in terms of how I approach that. And I do a little bit of private coaching in the side and supporting people with those kind of processes. And there's some really key techniques that are really important to do that. So, I do this kind of separately as well as my day job. And people are interested in that, tap me up on LinkedIn. But a lot of that is to do with there's some really clear models for success that you'll get, particularly for assessment centres. Is that helpful, Jonathan?
Great tips. Yeah. And I think it's all about understanding the law firm you're applying for in great depth, understanding the news that have taken place, their dynamics, their challenges, their successes, and kind of bringing that into the conversation, right? So you're really paying attention.
Yeah.
Ed,
John, sorry, John, I've got one point because there's been a really good question asked by Dallas. Asked a really good question. Thanks, Dallas. You talked about an ethical question. So ask whether someone has any contacts at the firm and who. Okay. And I actually think this is one of the most misunderstood things when it comes to law firms. So the reason we asked for contacts at a firm, it's got nothing to do with nepotism at all. It's got no problem in terms of, you know someone, so we had you through. The only reason we do that as a law firm is we know who to let know internally if you've been unsuccessful. So if your uncle's a partner at the firm, for example, and you're going to be unsuccessful, we will always, out of courtesy, let them know at the same time as yourself. By the way, we know you've had a contact at the firm. Unfortunately, they're not going through to the next round. Just wanted to let you know out of courtesy. So the question about a contact at the firm is nothing to do with nepotism. It's all about just communicating internally. And if you say, if you met a trainee or you've talked to a trainee, put that in your application. Don't wait for that box. Say, I met Ed at this event and he talked about this and it inspired me to be a lawyer. Name drop that, because I tell you what, that we really do spot that quite a lot if you talk to people at the firm as well. So Dallas, that's an answer to your question. I'll reply to some of the answers in the chat, John. I'll let you get back onto your
Thank you, George. Thank you. And I just want to come back to Ed, because I'd love to hear about your experience in the assessment centre. Just how did that go and how did you prepare for that?
So I think a lot of it was sort of sort of re-going over all the things you'd sort of done in your application process. The DWF sort of at the time of my applications and the assessment centre had just been sort of bought out by a private equity firm called Inflection. And so there was a question on that. And if I had not known that, I think it would have been a pretty sort of glaring omission. So I think that it's always good to look up sort of anything current with the firm. And then there were sort of some group exercises, which I think, to be honest, I don't really know how you'd prepare for that. Just sort of, if you work well in a team, it sort of seems to be, well, I guess don't try and be over assertive, but don't just sort of sit there and do nothing. And then the writing task that they had at DWF was sort of, it was sort of the main issue was more time pressure to sort of get everything in rather than it being like a really sort of highly technical. I think it was, if I remember rightly, it was sort of writing minutes for a meeting and sort of deciding what was relevant and what's not, and all sorts. But yeah, I think the main thing is sort of make sure you sort of know the firm and anything current that's going on. And I mean, I've always thought if you ask sort of an insightful question at the end when sort of your interviewers ask any questions, that always looks good. But I don't know. I'd have to ask George if that's actually something people take into account.
I think it sounds like a good idea to me, George.
What's your question there, Ed? Go on.
So at the end of, I always thought sort of in the interviews that I did was sort of, if you can ask a really sort of good question at the end when they say, is there any questions? That would look good. But is that something you sort of think about at all? Or is it more just, does anyone genuinely have any questions about how this is all working?
Dark arts about asking a question.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Interviews now tend to be very scripted and very formulaic. Yeah. We end our interview before the question section. So you'll say that is the end of the assessed portion of the interview. So you won't be marked on your question. However, I would say that after all interviews, you go through the numerical kind of side of things and where people stand against each other. Unfortunately, there is a leaderboard. That's the way it works. And we'll have a conversation with all our partners who are interviewing around individuals as well. And actually, if there is a borderline decision to be made, usually how individuals come across at interview, and the interactions you've had are really important. So I say asking important questions is a really good indicator of how switched on you are and where you are in that next stage. So even if it's not going to get you an extra tick in the box, it's going to really give over that impression. And I actually think by asking the right question, you can learn a lot about whether the firm is right for you. See the question as your chance to ask the firm that question. So what is the most important thing about working here? Or really good question is, what made you join this firm and what makes you stay at this firm? Stuff where you're going to learn about the culture and the experience and get a little bit more information about whether they're right for you. Because I would never begrudge anyone for turning down DWF because we're not the right firm. I would begrudge you for taking an offer if we are the wrong firm, and then have a challenging experience as well. So to that point, Ed, it's not marked, but it is actually really important for you guys when you're doing the assessment centres to use those as a valuable answer.
Yeah.
Good insight. George, can I come to you again? There's been a couple of questions about paralegals that have a few years of work experience keen to apply for trainee roles. Is there any particular way they should couch that, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in terms of they've had multiple applications and they don't know how to own the narrative of that?
Yeah, and the fact that they've got some work experience under their belt. They want to step up onto a trainee program, but I don't know how it might be perceived by the law firm if they've been sort of stagnating as a paralegal for a while, how that would be, perceived.
That's fine. So we know, because about 15% of all our DBRF trainees are DBRF paralegals before they become trainees. It's actually just a really good way to promote people, and lots of firms will look at that, some more than others, but we look at promoting people internally. I think my team will laugh when I say own the narrative, but own the narrative yourself. Take back control of the story. I sound like Alistair Campbell now. Take back ownership of the story. And the story is, why did you start where you are? And why are you here now? And where do you want to be in the future? Kind of the beginning, middle, and end. So the beginning is, I came out of a law degree. I didn't really know what I want to do, so I got some paralegal work. Okay, why am I here now? Well, actually, after years of working in the firm, I know it's the place that I want to work. I've had exposure in this team and this team. But actually, why am I going in the future? Well, instead of being a paralegal and passing my SQE, I want exposure to a broader range of areas. I want to see different practice areas. I want to grow and develop in different areas. That's why a traineeship is the one for me. So actually, own that narrative and think about, why were you where you are? Why you're in this situation now, and what do you want to achieve? And actually, that's pretty watertight. And if you've ever got questions, say, have you applied for other firms, or have you, why haven't you been successful before? It's part of your career development journey. No one's expecting you to be right first time. And I think, confident vulnerability, I think, can be really important when it comes to these interviews. I know it's a challenge, but actually say, I haven't succeeded in previous years. I've gone away and got feedback every time, and I've come back. I think that demonstrates resilience. I think that demonstrates my motivation to go down this route. But actually, most people in firms are really willing their paralegals to do extremely well, and will put a preference in. So, for example, if you are external to DWF, you have a 6% chance of making an assessment centre. If you're internal, it's a 24% chance, because we actually preference internal candidates where we can. So that's really important. I did see a question in the chat about someone who is a working parent and maybe can't get some paralegal experience. And I think I've said before, people will have heard me say, that literally 2 full-time jobs, being a parent and being a lawyer. And I tell you what, being a lawyer is not as important as being a parent. Okay, it's just to put it out there, and firms are starting to understand that a lot more. And lots of firms like ours will have what we call a direct route. So you come through an assessment centre, but actually we expect people to not need a vacation scheme because they can't take time off. And that route is built for parents, people with caring responsibilities, people with other jobs as well. So lots of firms have routes for those individuals. And again, the whole point of that route is looking for career changes, looking for people who haven't got paralegal experience. Like I said, we've got quite a lot of career changes, and actually they come across really positively to make an example of that on their application.
Brilliant. One more I definitely want to get to you, George, is let me just check, from Francesca about being neurodivergent and struggling with psychometric tests. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great one, Francesca. Like I said, I don't ever mention on this call, I'm neurodivergent. I've got dyspraxia, right? So that means that the thoughts that happen in my brain don't come out on paper the way they should, or with my hands. I'm really crap at riding a bike. I can't tie my shoelaces. They're not particularly great. So that's my neurodivergence. That makes me quite different. I got diagnosed at university. I didn't really know. I went to state school, so I was always relatively clever, so they were never going to pick up that I was slightly different in that way. So I think there's a couple of points that are really challenging. We had a 24% of our offers last year went to individuals who identify as neurodivergent. We don't have psychometric testing. I do not think that is by accident. I think that actually we try and assess people in various different methods and modes and have proper reasonable adjustments in place. So if you know that psychometric testing is going to be a challenge for your neurodivergence, you can look at firms that have particular streams, look for firms that are particularly strong on that, or don't have that psychometric testing in place, or actually make sure you get in contact with the firm in advance to say, hi, I'm neurodivergent. It's really important for me that I have reasonable adjustments. Can you make sure your psychometric testing has reasonable adjustments on that? And always ask that question as well. So actually, they may have a look at the grade boundaries for you because it may be an assessment that doesn't work in your way. They may give you extra time. You may get different software to complete your psychometric test. So if firms continue to use it, and lots of firms do, that's unfortunate, but actually communicate with them early about your neurodivergence and what you might need. And that goes the same for all trainees and any applicants as well. Always communicate about your neurodivergence. We can only help you if you disclose. And always remember, just the final thing I'll give anyone who is neurodivergent on the call, it's really, really important that you take ownership for who you are and what you need to do to get to where you need to be as well. A firm can give you the tools to be successful, but you need to use the tools. Okay, so you can ask for particular tools, but if you don't use them, they're not going to work, right? So if you are neurodivergent, you have to take responsibility for asking for the adjustments, but you still have to perform to that standard to get through. And I can say that as someone who's HR trained and neurodivergent and does this for a living as well. Firms want you to have a smooth ride and want you to be successful, but it does take a little bit of time and takes honesty from you as to what you need support in.
That's great, George. I imagine there may be some candidates that are slightly nervous about disclosing neurodiversity at this application stage, but you would definitely encourage that?
Yeah, I absolutely would, because, okay, so just general background is people tend to conflate neurodivergency with intelligence, okay, which is really, really unhelpful. You might hear phrases like Rain Man tend to be used, which is one of the positive attributions of neurodivergence to intelligence, but lots of people conflate the two. No link between most neurodivergent conditions and IQ at all, okay, it's a full spectrum. And so that's why in our industry you struggle. I've met a lot of tax partners in my career, and quite a lot of them probably have a form of neurodivergence undisclosed. That makes them fantastic tax lawyers, okay, and lots of other areas of law as well. So I think that as firms get more comfortable and confident, the most important thing is that you can disclose, because the only person you're harming if you don't disclose is yourself over the long term. HR departments, early careers teams are much, much better than they were even 5 years ago in handling these things and keep it completely confidential as well. And what I do worry is that if you don't disclose and you become a trainee, and after 4 months, I'm getting feedback from your supervisor, your time management isn't great, you're a little bit sloppy, your attention to detail isn't good, that's really not helpful, because actually then you're neurodivergent in a training contract without the support you need. So tell it early. It won't really impact anyone. And actually we put reasonable adjustments in the entire process as well. So you can always have that extra support. But I would definitely disclose. And if anyone has any queries about neurodivergent and how to disclose, again, I'll put my LinkedIn in the chat so you can ask me questions about it and get some support or coaching if you need, because I know it can be quite niche and quite difficult.
Thanks, George. That's really nice advice. And I think it does come back to the kind of conversation around fit for yourself and a firm. And if a firm isn't willing to have that conversation with you and you're neurodiverse, then does it mean that's the right organization for you? Possibly not. Narissa, I can see there's a few questions about foundations. Is there anything you want to say to clarify any of the questions?
Is there any particular questions being asked?
So it's flexible study, isn't it?
Yes. Very flexible. You can do it alongside work. It's 10 hours per week, roughly. I would say about 2 hours per day in terms of content.
And it can start at any time, right?
Yes. So if they're doing it standalone, you can start the course at any given time.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's great. Thanks for that clarification. Let's have another quick look, see if there's any other questions that we can answer just for the last 5 minutes. Feel free to send your questions in. I can see a big bank of questions here. Just want to check what we've covered already. There's one here from Dahlia about work experience. How could non-law students gain legal work experience, whether as a paralegal or a vacation scheme during their undergrad? Yeah, I mean, some placements can count. I mean, the new route to qualification, the SQE, has a very flexible approach to qualifying work experience. You have to demonstrate that and get it confirmed by your employer. But there's no reason why, if you're doing work experience alongside your undergrad or doing placements, that couldn't be counted towards your 2 years qualifying work experience. George, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. I know some law firms like to have a particular approach in terms of how they confirm work experience. Is that what's your approach at DWF?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's something that we've learned is that basically firms can't really say no to you in terms of confirming your work experience. And, that might sound pretty obtuse, but actually, the key thing to remember about the change in regulation is it makes your individual supervisor responsible for signing off your experience, not the firm. So old school, you used to have a training principal signed you off on behalf of the firm. We signed off people we were in control of. New method, an individual puts their name to you. So actually, if you're negligent in the future, they're the person going to knock on your door. So they take personal liability, even though as a firm there is some liability on us, it's significantly less. So we can definitely support you with that. We like to have all of that run through our training principle anyway, just to make sure there's standard. And frankly, Carl, our training principal's had 14 years as training partner with us, so knows what we'll go through. And remember that you can only have 4 firms signing off on your 2 years QWE. So wait until your period of time. If you're there for someone with 2 weeks, don't get that signed off then. Wait for other experience, and you can always backdate that. Individuals like my former colleagues at Lawyers on Demand are actually doing paralegal gigs and consultancy gigs to actually get people qualifying work experience as well. So I'd always approach your supervisor in the first instance. They'll probably get in touch with early careers. Some firms may say, yep, sign off straight away. Some firms may say we have to run that through our training partner. But at the end of the day, if you've done the experience and your supervisor wants to sign you off, you'll be absolutely fine.
Another question here for you, George, and I've got some thoughts on this, is if applying to law firms, is it helpful to have completed or enrolled on a prep course already or not? Or does it matter?
I think that I don't think it's going to sway us either way. I think it shows a level of commitment, and I don't think we've got a problem with that. And I think a lot of firms, if they wanted, you would backdate some cost if that's something you were looking to do. I don't want to speak to all law firms in that circumstance. I think the clearest thing is that, again, we are absolutely taking people on their skills, their behaviours, and what they can demonstrate their skills. Ignore that. And they can demonstrate their skills and behaviours separately. So actually, what's really, really important is that regardless of whether you've signed up for a course, regardless if you have work experience, as long as you demonstrate what you've learned in an application form and assessment centre, the rest of it is relatively incidental for me. But Jonathan, you might disagree.
No, I think from a DWF perspective, that is right. I think smaller regional firms where budgets are a little tighter on training might appreciate somebody that's booked on and passed SQE1. That gives them less of a challenge to support you through SQE2 and the work experience. But I think every firm is different, so and it also depends on which firms you're looking to apply for. But I think it's again worth understanding the firm's recruitment processes and what they're looking for across the UK.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, just got a couple of minutes left before we wrap up. Just checking if there's any other questions. Anyone spotted that's worth a conversation around? Ed, have you spotted anything that you'd like to talk to in the chat at all? I feel like we've not given you enough of the mic today. So I'd like to
I think I saw a while ago there was a question about how to get, how did I go about getting the work experience at more regional firms?
Any thoughts?
And actually, I looked at so I live in the Midlands, but Warwickshire. So there aren't many big cities around there. So I just looked at firms in my local area, and some of them did have vacation schemes that they weren't really, because they didn't have the prospect of a training contract at the end. But so I just applied to a couple of them, and then I had. I've got some family that live down in Hertfordshire, and I just did the same thing for where they live, so I could stay at theirs when I did the course if I was successful. And so I think it's just look around a lot. I also did a couple days of work shadowing with some in-house law teams that I found on my university careers website. So there's all sorts of cast a wide net. I would say there's a lot of ways to do it.
Yeah, I think absolutely being proactive around work experience is definitely going to look good on your application. Great. Well, I think we're coming towards the end of our session now. So I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody on the panel. So George, thank you for your insights as always. It's great to have you on board today and share your views. Ed, congrats on winning that training contract. Keep up the good work. Thank you for joining us and sharing your experience. And thank you, Narissa, for sharing your insights on how we can support a BARBRI, how we can support non-law grads. And just want to finish on the kind of comments that we started on, really. And I think we've kind of emphasized that today, but just think about how you can demonstrate your transferable skills. You'll all have them, something that you can demonstrate to the law firm that really is something along the lines of what they're looking for in terms of skills or attributes, and be confident in being a non-law grad. And I wish you all the best of luck. And a few of us are sticking around for questions afterwards if you are doing the same.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. And just from Legal Cheek, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers today. That was so insightful. And I'm sure everyone who's joined today has really gotten so much out of that session. So many different topics covered there. So that was really amazing. Thank you so much. But as our attendees will know, this is not the end of the event. It's time now to network. So if you still have burning questions that you want to discuss with all of our speakers here today, it's time now to click on the expo on the left-hand side of your page. And from there, click on the banner image to enter any of today's networking booths. For the best networking experience, I'd really encourage you to share your audio and video and to ask your questions directly to our networkers. And once your question has been answered, it would be great if you could then come off the screen and allow others to go up to ask their questions. This just makes sure that the session will run as smoothly as possible. So once again, thank you everyone for attending today's discussion, and thank you to our speakers, and we hope to see you at more of our events very soon.